I think I experienced the worst evangelical altar call when I was a kid. It might not be, but it's at least in the running. Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. And before I get started, I've got to own something that is kind of hard to even say, but I did this too. I grew up in this culture. I didn't have to be taught any of it. I just experienced it. And then when I became a youth pastor and then a pastor, I used the same methods. Never this crazy and wild, but I did. And I traumatized people, traumatized teenagers, and probably hundreds, maybe even thousands. And you can't undo that. You just have to own it and try to stop it from happening. So it's important to just call it out and tell the stories. So the story. I was in summer camp. It was like my third year in summer camp, and I was loving it. I had a dark and mysterious summer camp girlfriend a la Wednesday Addams, and the preacher had been doing some wild things, saying some crazy things, and teaching us about the end of the world, because that's of course what you do when you have teenagers for a summer camp. For the previous 2 nights, he had been talking about something called the tribulation, which is a horrible dispensationalist concept where it says that at the end of the world, things are gonna really get bad. Rivers are gonna turn to blood, plagues, all the things that just you can't even imagine, boils on people's skin because they received the mark of the beast, all kinds of crazy stuff. But you could avoid it if you got saved, and if you got saved, you would be raptured out, that all the Christians got to leave and not suffer all of the bad stuff. We need to pause here to remind you that the rapture was made up by a guy named John Darby in the 1830s and isn't a real thing. All of this stuff is utter hogwash and does not ever need to be believed or repeated. But back to the story. This preacher was top-notch at manipulation, and we were just clay in the palm of his hand. It was the last night of camp, which, as you know, if you ever went to camp, you are emotionally and physically exhausted. You are ripe for the ultimate manipulation, and he knew that he had us. So he is working himself up into this fevered pitch, talking about all of these things, all of the water and the blood and the boils and all of the stuff. And all we have to do is get saved. Today is the day of salvation. You never know when Jesus is going to come. Unbeknownst to us, he had 2 accomplices. First accomplice had sneaked behind the crowd that was on a screened-in porch, had one of those vuvuzelas, the big plastic trumpets. The other accomplice was at the light switch. He told us the way that we knew the rapture was happening is that we would hear a trumpet blast, and when the trumpet sounded, all of the Christians would go and meet Jesus in the sky and would be saved from all of the horrible tribulation things that he had been telling us about. But those left behind, well, it was going to be really bad for them. And now the real trauma. He was working himself up, as I said before, fevered pitch, and he kept saying, what if it happened tonight? What if you don't want to be left behind? Today is the day of salvation. And then he quoted a scripture. The scripture is something like, in the twinkling of an eye, like a thief in the night, we will meet Jesus, or something like that. But he didn't finish the scripture. He said, in the twinkling of an eye, like a thief in the night. He stopped in the middle of the word, and accomplice number 1 blew the vuvuzela. Accomplice number 2 turned off the lights, and it was silent. You heard nothing. You heard nothing but fear, and then children crying. And he let the crying last for just long enough before he came back on the mic and said, the rapture hasn't happened, but what if it had? Would you have been ready? And then he said, it's time for you to come and get saved. It's time for you to pray the prayer of salvation. There are adults here at the altar ready to pray with you. And then you heard the sound of like 200 metal chairs scraping across the floor and everyone going to the altar. I went. I prayed like 10 different times to be saved. And I was weeping, just weeping at the altar in the trauma that I had experienced. And then Wednesday saw me. She came, put her arms around me, and we wept together until our hormones took us into a different space. This is wrong. There is nothing okay about this. And when you send your kid to a summer camp with an evangelical church, I guarantee you this kind of stuff is still going on because I still hear stories about it. But here's the thing. This kind of experience can be used for good. It can be used to help children, teenagers heal from trauma, help them find their true identity. And for me, that's what I ended up doing. When I realized what I had done wrong, I kept trying to get speaking engagements and going to summer camps, and instead of traumatizing them and trying to entice them to say some sort of prayer, I tried to, work through stuff like Brene Brown's material and tried to bring them some sort of healing and some sort of peace with their own identity. Because you don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but you do have to stop the manipulation.